Hello, this is Strategy Miscellany, and today we are looking at Children of a Dead Earth. It is a game that claims to be the most scientifically accurate depiction of near-future space combat that has been released, at least on the computer. There is a board game called Attack Vector Tactical that's in many ways similar. It's exceedingly complicated, but if you're interested in that sort of thing, definitely worth taking a look at. So, Children of a Dead Earth is a lot like the space combat you'll see in The Expanse, but with a bit less technological advancement. Essentially, instead of big, powerful fusion reactors, they have regular old nuclear reactors. Instead of fusion drives that can do a constant acceleration burn across the solar system, they have to fiddle about with interplanetary transfers, similar to the way that our modern space probes have to. And so basically, they're closer to our technology level. The setting is that about 200 years from now, basically the surviving humans are, children of a dead Earth. Because about 100 years before the events of this game, World War III happened between some sort of vaguely defined Soviet bloc, neo-Soviet bloc, I suppose, and some sort of vaguely defined power in East Asia. And this went from things like using nuclear weapons to cause a tsunami off the enemy's shores, to eventually dropping an asteroid on Europe. And this kicked up so much water vapor and dust and such that it caused runaway global warming that no one was able to stop in time. The Earth now looks more like Venus, and the survivors are scattered throughout the solar system. And in the campaign, you are an admiral for one of these factions of survivors. And, let's get into it. So I have played through the campaign before, so that I know what I'm doing a little bit here. But we can start with the first level here, and in the beginning you're not allowed to design your own ships or anything. You're stuck with the baseline ships that they have here. Now this level is basically going to be a Delta V puzzle. It's basically, you've got to get to this cargo freighter orbiting Luna and refuel it and then bring it to a space station. And you've got to do that within a set amount of time and within a set amount of Delta V spent. So here's some backstory you can read through if you're interested. Here's our backstory about our faction. Basically, we've been defined by Indonesia, India, the Philippines, and Pakistan, and the refugees from those places when we left the solar system, when we left Earth. And our headquarters are on Mars. And in this mission, we have a large methane tanker. That's going to be our ship we're driving around. A cargo freighter we have to go refuel. And a methane depot we have to get to.
Incoming transmission.
So I use WASD to rotate, zoom in and out with the mouse wheel, pan the camera by click and drag, or shift WASD. Roll the camera by doing this here. Honestly, that's not used very often. There's Earth. As you can see, it has people living in orbit, but nobody on the surface, and it really doesn't look so good. Looks a lot more like Venus. Back to the moon. Alright, now we've got our ships. this is our disabled cargo freighter that we have to go refuel. Over here, we've got our depot and our tanker. The methane depot, of course, it can't move. And here is the methane tanker. You can see it's got the crew up front, a bunch of engines on the back, big radiators to dissipate the heat from the nuclear reactor to power the thing. Little radiator to radiate the heat that the crew modules release, and a whole bunch of methane in between. And because of that, it's got a whole bunch of delta V. But it could even add a little more if it were full, so we fill her up. And we have to make the methane tanker a separate fleet so we can drive it around by itself. And now you see we have the time frame over here. We can go as little as a minute or as much as 6 days. When you're out in deep space, sometimes 6 days is not even enough, really. But let's go forward an hour. See, everything moves. We've got the moon, which is our current frame of reference. And we've got our ships orbiting the moon here and there. Now we got to click on the trajectory button, and if you've ever seen Kerbal Space Program, this will be kind of similar. It looks a little bit different, but it's essentially the same concept. So you can see we have blue to move out of plane, radial to burn tangentially, green to burn tangentially, and green to burn radially in and out, and tangential to accelerate or decelerate in red. You can look into the future, you can see where everything is as we go through our orbit. And also to note, because we're on a free fall trajectory, we're not doing station-keeping burns to keep in a stable orbit. So we can be affected by the gravity of other bodies. Right now that's not very much because we're close to the moon, but if we were, say, wide orbit around the moon, we would be affected by Earth's gravity, and our orbit would not be stable. This can either be extremely annoying, or it can in fact be used for your advantage in the right cases. So here they're just having us expand our orbit to cross the freighter's orbit. See it's showing the delta V over there, when we're going to do it, how many we have. There, you can see we're getting a little symbol showing we can link up with our cargo freighter. But they want me to do this the inefficient way, match its orbit first. We'll humor them. So you can see we're extending out. And then we're going to do another burn to widen our orbit. Now we're on the same orbit as this guy. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make our orbit wider so we're a little slower so that our friend there can catch up. See, now we're actually getting an intersect with the cargo freighter. It's a little bit counterintuitive. In orbit, you have to go faster to go slower, because you make your orbit wider, and then the other ship catches up from you because it's using a narrower orbit and getting around the planet faster. Alright, now our fleet is together. Now we can refuel our friend the cargo freighter. want us to just split out the cargo freighter, leave the methane tanker up in orbit here. It's a stable enough orbit. It can use the station keeping burns and stay where it is. Now the freighter can go home. So we talk to the cargo freighter, put in the trajectory, and then they teach you a little trick here where you can actually set the frame of reference to your target. It makes all the orbits look strange, but you can then get your orbits to just basically intersect that, and it will work because you're no longer looking from the frame of reference of the moon, you're looking from the frame of reference of the vehicle orbiting the moon. So basically this is our path relative to this guy. It's a little bit weird to think about spatially, but it makes these rendezvous much easier. Here we go. So yeah, basically the differences between doing maneuvers in this and Kerbal Space Program, if you've played that or heard of it, is that number one, this lets you change your frame of reference around yourself. Number two, this uses an n-body physics simulation as opposed to patched conics. So to explain that, I mean, patched conics basically means each planetary body has its own sphere of influence where only it affects you. So you start on the Earth or on Kerbin, you turn into a higher orbit, you eventually end up captured by the moon, and once you're in the sphere of influence of the moon, you're only worrying about the moon's gravitational pull, nothing else is perturbing your orbit. Now in this, you're having to deal with the gravitational forces from everybody at once. If you're in close to one, it's typically the only one that affects you. If you're in any major way, if you're in what's called its Hill sphere. If you're outside its Hill sphere, then you get lots more wacky orbits. There is actually a mod for Kerbal Space Program called Principia that causes the same thing. I have never tried it. To be honest, n-body simulation hurts my brain a little bit, but this game makes it fairly easy to work with most of the time. Now, the other thing is that I would argue the Kerbal Space Program system is more user-friendly. These nodes have a tendency to jump all over the place, and it can be a bit frustrating. But, you know, as you use them, you'll get used to that more, and it becomes easier to figure out. And now, you can see we finally get close enough on our trajectory that we can join the fleet. Now we can go back to our default frame and see what this looks like in the sense of orbiting the moon. So we go out to let it catch up, then we come screaming in, we do a slowing down burn, we reference. Now we can also set the frame of reference to the Earth, in which case you can see we're orbiting the moon, which is orbiting the Earth, or we can even set the frame of reference to the sun, in which case everything we're doing is on kind of a small little patch of orbiting the Earth, orbiting the moon, which is orbiting the Earth, which is orbiting the sun. It's not really very useful to look at, but it's interesting that we have it. We can also even set it back to our methane tanker that we set up, in which case it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Except for kind of spiraling away from it. So, back to the standard frame.
Incoming transmission.
And repeat the mission. However, we didn't do it fast enough or under enough delta V to get better to bronze. We're going to come back to that someday. But that basically teaches you the basics of navigating your ship around in the orbit of one body. Of course, once you get into something like the Jovian system with a bunch of different moons, and a big planet with big center of gravity. It's a bit more complicated. You'll see that in later missions like this one. So here we actually get to fight for the first time. Basically, the USTA has attacked one of our cargo freighters, or a quote rogue spacecraft from the USTA, the other major faction, has attacked one of our cargo craft, and so we're going to go blow it up. We have got a patrol ship, runs on methane, presumably with a nuclear engine, because methane is not a monopropellant, it wouldn't burn by itself, so we've got to be running it through a nuclear engine. Its weapons, it's got some nice rail guns and some more basic conventional cannons. And you can see here its mass, 1,360 tons, and its cost 42.1 million credits. The enemy craft is a laser skiff, which is about the same mass as us but cheaper, and basically has one big laser with 8 different mounts around it that allow the laser to shoot at different targets. So there's one sort of central laser producing laser energy in the center, and it's being fired out of one of these 8 mounts at any given time. And it's also got some basic cannons and a decoy launcher, which would fire out flares to distract your missiles, because your missiles are heat-seeking. And so if it can fire a flare that's hotter than the ship is at the current time, then that will actually work to prevent your ship from firing at it. Now, our ship doesn't have any missiles, so this doesn't really matter in this case, but there will be missile barrages in later missions that we will have to deal with.
Incoming transmission.
Alright, so they have us figuring out an intercept here. You can see we are both on the same plane. They're still keeping that part easy for us. And so let's just kind of see where everything is going. So here's us. Start a trajectory.
Incoming transmission.
And yes, because we are in the orbit of Ganymede, if we go out of orbit, if we go out enough, we're going to get some weird perturbations on this orbit. So the thing is, actually, we've got a fairly good intercept here. Well, it is a bit expensive in terms of delta V. You can see it tells us it'll cost at least... Where did that go? Tell us it costs at least... zoom in on that. Here we are. Costs at least 755 meters per second. And if I click on it, it actually costs 830 meters per second. So, I mean, that's okay, but I think we can do better. So, let's fiddle around with this bit. I think if we go out, and we try and match orbits with this guy, way out in deep, in high orbit, we can get a cheaper intercept because we'll both be moving slower. So here you can see where our orbit's being perturbed. It's actually causing the trajectory to leave the Ganymedean orbit formation. Here we go. Now we're just getting into orbit into an intercept with them for only 410. You can see here it tells me about the intercept. Our crossing vector is 132 meters per second. That's pretty slow. In some cases you want a fast crossing vector, especially if you're doing a missile strike. You don't want them to have time to shoot down your missiles. In some cases you want a slow intercept, especially if your weapons outrange theirs, so that you have more time to blast them before they get in close. In this case, I really think any sort of intercept will work fine. You can see the perpendicular velocity towards each other, parallel velocity sliding past each other, closest approach of 10.2 clicks. I can make that closest approach closer, most likely, if I fiddle with this a bit, but it will probably work better if I do that a slightly different way, so I'm going to demonstrate. Alright, so we go forward a few hours. Now that we're real close to the intersect point, we can do these shifts more with more fine-tuning available. So here we go. See, now we're going to approach within 1.32 kilometers of each other. And that will make this much more dramatic and allow my cannons to work well. They're not even trying to evade. In later missions, they're going to do a lot more work to try and evade you. But in this case, we just let it happen. And
incoming transmissions.
Here we are. You can see they are almost in range with us. We're going to intercept them in 4 minutes, unless, of course, we or they go blasting in one direction or another. These are our cannons, these are our railguns, which have a better range, mostly because they're faster. And there's different orders we can give. So we'll start with a homing order to basically blast towards the enemy. See, their weapons are not nearly as close range as ours, or as far range. Now, here we get to target their different systems. What I'm going to do is target their radiators. It's almost never a bad idea. Radiators stick way out, pretty fragile, and if the radiators are off, the reactor in the ship can't run up from anything like full power because it can't radiate excess heat, and so all these fancy, expensive, powered, guzzling lasers, they just won't work. Alright, so now we go back to our ship, although we can watch from their ship's point of view if we prefer. You can see our engine blasting there, getting us towards the enemy.
Incoming transmission.
We're now in range. But our railguns are not. Oh, actually, our railguns are ready to fire. Oh, maybe they're not. Alright. So what we gotta do is, like an old-time sailing ship, because our guns are on the sides. Now, there are designs that allow you to fire well while firing straight on. Some of them have disadvantages as well, but when we get into ship design, we'll get into that. You can see our railguns are kind of bolted on the sides of the ship, and they've got okay turning radius. It's not enough for them to fire straight ahead. So what we gotta do is orient broadside like an old-time sailing ship. And now, you'll see our engine in the back start to turn us. And as we start to turn even just a little bit, our railguns can open fire. Now I've paused so that you can see the railgun shots. This is not a laser, this is a railgun with a tracer. A laser is invisible in this game except for on its point of fire and its point of impact, because there's nothing in space for it to bounce off against. And you can see we're about to reach the enemy with these shots. And let's watch and see if we can shred these radiators. We're missing at first, but see, we're kind of homing in on them. Thing is, their ship is constantly dodging, and so we're not leading the target by enough, and there's not really a way to change that, unfortunately, but hopefully our ship will eventually figure it out, much like they did. And you can see we're impacting their armor right there. Alright, now as it just said, sometimes it makes sense to target different systems. And there's another trick that they won't teach you. Oftentimes, it makes more sense to just send more stuff downrange. So we can click on this button to ignore the range on our cannon, because even though we're not as accurate, if we're just putting a lot of lead or whatever our cannon fires, it might be something fancy in science fiction like osmium, densest metal in existence. We're sending slugs of osmium downrange enough. We're gonna hit something. I'm also gonna change our targeting a little bit, try and blow up their laser mounts, because the aim for the radiator seems to cause it to miss out the back too much. So let's fix that a little bit. You can see now we have that second stream of tracers, considerably slower than our railguns. But just putting that more stuff downrange should cause more damage to the enemy ship. You can see there we actually did some decent damage. We can click on the armor visualizer. You can see we really burned through their armor right here in the middle. Problem is, it doesn't look like there's that much important to target right there. It doesn't seem to have done any serious damage to the vessel. But we just shot off a radiator. Excellent. Now they're only going to be able to fire their lasers about half as much. We've also damaged a laser turret, or disabled a laser turret and blown up some of their fuel tanks. Now their fuel tanks are filled with methane only. Because this is, not reactive by itself in the depths of space, it just hisses out rather than exploding spectacularly. If they were filled with a hypergolic monopropellant that basically burns on its own, then we would have ignited that and blown up their ship. That's a danger with monopropellants.
Incoming transmission.
Alright, we just shot off both their lasers, or both their radiators, and really some other stuff to bear. And now their ship is dead in space. Means that we have succeeded. So we'll stop firing once these are just the shots that were already in the air. But basically they have waved the white flag and we will presumably go over and take them prisoner or something. Alright, and this time we got a silver rating because our ships received no damage. We just weren't really fast enough to get it done before the record time. We could have done some more tricks with Delta V to get there faster, but in this case, we just get the silver medal, and that's okay. Really, even beating this game is quite an achievement. Only, I think, something like 4.7% of the players on Steam have it. So if you pick this up and you're having difficulty with it, don't feel bad. It's exceedingly common. Alright, and I am going to call it here for this video, but we will continue with Children of a Dead Earth. We'll also be playing some Kerbal Space Program on here, a little bit of something called Waves 2, where you're designing old-timey dreadnoughts and other warships of the sea in the early 20th century. So really, the idea is that there will kind of be 3 different things that are all interrelated, but all have their own thing. So in this one, you're flying and eventually building spaceships in a war game. Then we also have, if you don't like the space part of that, we have one where you're building ships on the sea in a war game. And then if you don't like the war part and you'd rather see some nice peaceful space exploration, we'll be playing some Kerbal Space Program, where you're building and flying spaceships, but purely for peaceful purposes of exploring the home system of the Kerbals. And so really there should be something for everyone. I am Strategy Miscellany, signing off.